Good evening, guys. Bigfooter Gary. It is almost midnight. You can hear the crickets, the frogs. No mosquitoes. Perfect time for me to sit out and present the next viewer account to you guys. I've gone through a lot of the stories that have been sent to me, and I'm picking the best ones. And this one fits that vein. I think it's a very good, believable story. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's get right into it. Dear Bigfooter Gary, I believe these accounts you are presenting to us are real. Each one is exciting and has a smell of truth to them. If you have had an encounter, you just know. I read most of the people's comments as well. I can't believe some of them saying too many details or sounds professional. Makes me laugh. I'm going to take the time to tell you about my encounter in the woods of Maine, and let me tell you, I remember it like it was yesterday. Even though this encounter took place almost 10 years ago. I have lots of details for you, and I just want to ask why any of us sending these to you would make these encounters up. What do we have to gain from that? I want to share because I had a real encounter with something unknown in the woods. I was not alone. I had a close girlfriend of mine visiting our log cabin for the weekend, and we both had the most terrifying experience. It happened, and we both remember the sequence of events very clearly. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of us with these experiences. Don't let the negative trolls get you down, Gary. This account really did happen, and everything I'm about to tell you changed my belief system. Before this encounter, I never gave Bigfoot a thought. It's out there, and it's real. So here it is, my Bigfoot story. My husband and I have owned a cabin in the woods for almost 20 years now. He inherited it from his family when his grandfather passed away about 5 years after we were married. We had been using the cabin for years, going in a couple times a season, and because we had shown so much interest in the place, my grandfather-in-law left it to us upon his passing. I won't say exactly where in the northern woods of Maine we are located, because we still own and use that cabin to this day. I don't go in without my husband, and it did take a few years to get back into the groove of enjoying the place. But I am there now, and I believe that Sasquatch just wants us to respect its space. You should pay close attention when in the woods, and if you see unusual signs or markers, respect them. Back in those days, I had no clue. I didn't give Bigfoot a passing thought. So to look for signs of something other than animals never crossed my mind. It was late summer 2013. I had taken the later half of a week off from work, and as a summer getaway had planned a 4-day trip into our log cabin with a college friend of mine. Her name is Nancy. That's her real name, and she and I are both fine using real names. My name, by the way, is Karen. No, not that Karen. The other one. Just ask my husband how much I enjoy those memes. The world has both Bigfoot and good Karens, just so you know. Anyhow, Nancy and I were going to drive the back roads to pull off about 5 miles from our cabin. You can ATV right to our front door, but both of us are in excellent shape and love hiking. So we decided, since our husbands were not joining us this particular weekend, we would hike in. This was not a new thing. Many times when the trails are wet, we do the same thing so as not to tear up the trails too bad. We always see wildlife on our hikes into the cabin and enjoy the birds and fresh air. From where we park the vehicles, we are about a 3/4 mile walk to the ATV system that heads right to our cabin and little lake. We are the only cabin on our lake. Not too much further down the trail at the next lake, there are 2 more cabins. We're not alone out there, but it is pretty infrequent that we actually run into anyone else on the trails. It's a good 20-minute hike over to the next lake and the closest neighbors. So if you do need help, it's not coming quickly, and there are no guarantees that anyone is actually around. We parked the truck and had our packs on in minutes. It was a warm afternoon. The sun was shining. It was supposed to be a great weekend. We were going into the cabin for some girl time. No work this weekend, a relaxing girls hang in the woods weekend, and we were going to talk some stuff out and enjoy nature. We hiked up the main road in about 10 minutes and started off down the much smaller trail that would lead into our cabin. Almost immediately, Nancy stopped me and asked if I had heard that. No, I had not heard anything, as I was actually talking at the time. We listened for a minute and nothing else caught our attention, so we started hiking again. We both chatted back and forth as we walked. Suddenly we heard it again, a loud bang. Back then we didn't know what it was, but nowadays everyone would call this a wood knock. A hollow, sharp crack of wood being slammed into wood. Both of us heard it this time. I really couldn't think of what it could be. It was only 100 yards off, or certainly not much further. We listened intently, and far off down the trail, we both thought we heard a third knock. Standing around with a heavy pack on with miles to walk was not something we were about to do. We really were not that bothered at the time. It was strange enough to make us stop, but once we were sure it was not an axe murderer, we both relaxed and continued on our journey. The woods are thick on the trail into the cabin, and it meanders through all kinds of terrain. Great stuff if you're trying to stay in shape with a heavy pack. After almost an hour of hiking, the trail opens into a set of fields. Many years my husband is at the cabin a lot, and often he cuts these fields with an old lawn tractor we have at the cabin. This year, however, he had been out of the country for work. To that point, he had only been to the lake once. The fields were full of waist-high grass, with the Maine ATV trail cutting pretty much through the 300 yards of open field. We decided to take a break in the field and take our packs off. We were over halfway to the cabin, but a 10-minute rest in the sun would rejuvenate us. As we both stood there stretching and taking some water, we could hear something moving quickly through the grass. It wasn't big or alarming, but we knew there was something there. At the far end of the field is a large tree. I don't know my trees. It had leaves, not needles, and is very large. Maybe an oak. Anyway, whatever was running through the grass ran to that tree and presumably up it. Curious, Nancy walked over to the base of the tree and looked up. "I see it," she reported. "I think it's a raccoon." As she stood there looking up, the strangest thing happened. Something fell out of the tree. Something small, and from where I was standing, yellow. Nancy stepped back in surprise. I walked over to stand beside her, both of us bending over to see what had fallen from the tree. It was not a branch as I would have suspected. It was half a Barbie doll, the top half. It had long blonde hair in a braid and no arms. I started laughing. What the hell? I looked up into the thick leaves of the tree above, but I didn't see any raccoon or other critter, just darkness. Nancy actually bent over and picked up the doll. "I think that raccoon wanted us to have it," she smirked. I grumbled something about rabies and started back towards our packs. From the tree above, a loud chittering and branch shaking occurred. I'm not sure what sound a raccoon makes, but Nancy might have been right. We made it to the cabin without further incident. We have a shed that my husband keeps tools in and the old lawn tractor, and I took a look at it as we walked past, making sure the heavy padlock was still in place. No broken windows, and everything looked as we had left it. Nancy and I opened the cabin up to the air. All of the doors and windows are screened, so we open the front and rear doors. The rear leads to a nice deck at the back overlooking the path down to the lake. We opened all the windows and settled in. There are 2 bedrooms on the main floor and a small kitchen and living room. Above, there's a loft with a 3rd bed and reading nook. It is a small but functional cabin. It wasn't long before dinner at this point, so we set about making a meal and having a couple of drinks on the deck. The afternoon passed into late evening and we just enjoyed each other's company. It was hot out, so we didn't feel like having a campfire. As it got dark, we decided to light some candles on the deck and an old Coleman lantern. We sat out for a couple more hours without incident. Having a few drinks, of course, meant I eventually had to use our facilities and go pee. Of course, we have no real water system at the cabin. An outhouse and gravity feed water for doing dishes and washing hands. Trust me, girls, I don't like outhouses either, but ours is actually not bad as far as outhouses go. I had my husband install a solar panel motion sensor inside so it's not dark and creepy. We keep a citronella candle in a nice housing ready to be lit and left on at all times while up at the cabin. I also meticulously broom away anything remotely resembling a cobweb. It's about as luxurious an outhouse as a girl could want. I had no sooner sat down to pee when the side of the outhouse was smacked very hard. The loud bang made me jump. Immediately I laughed. "Fuck off, Nancy," I yelled. "That's not funny." She didn't answer me. I finished my business fully expecting Nancy to jump out and scare me when I turned to shut the door behind me. She never did. Flashlight in hand, I made my way across the yard and back to the cabin. I found Nancy sitting on the deck, drink in hand. "You're not funny," I told her. The look of confusion on her face seemed genuine, and she asked me what I was talking about. Again, I was pretty sure the bang had come from outside of the outhouse, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe a branch had fallen on the roof or something. I didn't want to scare Nancy, so I replied that something had fallen on the outhouse, and I had thought it was her trying to scare me. "Nope, not me," she replied, and we both moved on. Looking back, I find it funny to see how the brain does not like to analyze things that don't make sense. It is much easier just to move on with normality, and that is what we did. It must have been about 11 o'clock when we both decided we were tired and it was time for bed. We went to the outhouse together. I stood guard while she went, and she did the same for me. No more banging occurred. We moved back into the cabin. As I say, it was hot. I left the doors open with just the screen doors closed and locked. All the windows were wide open as well. Lights out, we went to sleep. I have no idea what time it was when the noises from outside woke me up. It was very dark, middle of the night dark. From outside I could hear sobbing. It sounded very much like a baby crying. There were also chittering noises and the sound of a long, loud hiss. Mostly it sounded like crying. As I lay there listening and trying to figure out what I was hearing, Nancy's voice came from the doorway. "Karen, wake up. Karen, do you hear that?" I quickly whispered a quiet yes. "What the hell is it?" asked Nancy. I thought about it for a minute, listening. Again, as I said earlier, I don't know what a raccoon sounds like, but that was as good a guess as any. "It's just a raccoon, Nance. It's okay." Nancy seemed fine with that, and back to bed she went. I wasn't sure what I was hearing, and it was very well could have been a raccoon. I got up and closed the front and rear door of the cabin and bolted both, just in case. I went back to bed and noticed that the sounds had stopped. Maybe it was the coconut rum or the long hike into camp, but I fell asleep again almost immediately. You have to remember that all of this looking back makes sense and paints a broader picture, but at the time these events were all just laughable little things that go bump in the night. Strange and out of place. But if my husband were there, he would have told me the same thing. "It's just a raccoon, Karen. Go back to sleep." I know now that he would have been wrong, but at the time, I would have agreed. The next morning we slept in and everything was fine. We made breakfast, sat on the deck, killed a few hours, and were just lazy. By mid-morning, Nancy asked if we could take a walk around the lake. We had good hiking trails going off in either direction. A big part of the cabin is the woods and hiking. My husband would say ATVing and fishing, but I always prefer a good hike. I readily agreed with Nancy, and so we packed a picnic lunch and prepared to go for a hike. Before we left, though, I was going to go pee in the outhouse. Why go in the woods if you don't have to? As I started down the steps into the yard, I immediately noticed something strange. We have a flagstone on the bottom step, and on the flagstone sat 3 very smooth river or lake rocks and some very fine branch, which looking back I think was raspberry canes that were twisted and wound into a circle. I knew that step was clear last night, and I was really confused. I called Nancy and she came to look. At this point both of us were a little freaked out. The rocks were oval and very smooth. One was brown and the other 2 dark gray. The circle thing had little vines woven into it. I picked them up and looked around the yard. Of course I didn't see anyone. Had my neighbor been by that morning while we slept in? I knew they had grandkids. Maybe the kids were up visiting and had found some river treasures. I had and still have no idea what the weaving was. Maybe it was a craft you did with kids at camp. I had no idea. It was the only logical explanation I could think of. Once again, my brain kind of shut out the scary possibilities, and I picked up the items and put them on the little coffee table up on the porch. With no clear answers as to what all this was about, we simply continued on with our day. Nancy and I started down the trail to the lake and off down the shoreline. About 200 yards down this trail, you have to cross a small creek that runs into the lake. My husband has minnow traps here, and this is where he gets his bait for fishing. As it so happened, my husband had asked me if I could remember to put the traps in for him, as he had planned on making it to the cabin the following weekend, and fishing was going to be his priority. So Nancy and I took 3 traps and threw them out as far as they would go. Off we went to have a fantastic picnic and walk in the woods. We were probably gone 4 hours, and it was close to supper time by the time we made our way back up the trail to the creek. We had to pass the same spot with the minnow trap going home. To our surprise, all 3 traps were pulled out of the water. One was lying open on the trail, and the other 2 were looped up in the branches of a cedar tree. Yes, I know, cedar trees. I was mad at first. Let me explain. My husband and our closest neighbor sometimes share minnow traps. If they don't have any bait or the swamp below is too low, they all share. I immediately thought of our neighbors and the grandkids, who may or may not have been visiting, and that it must have been kids doing this for fun. Nancy, however, objected when I mentioned this theory. It's probably that raccoon, she told me. I know for a fact that they catch and eat minnows. Well, that settled it. Nancy was right, of course. It was the raccoon. We reset the traps and made our way back to the cabin. We ate dinner and the evening passed quietly. I really did have an uneasy feeling at this point. I didn't even go to the outhouse alone. I made Nancy come with me. I didn't really let on how bad I was feeling because I wanted her to have a great weekend. But the more I thought about all the strange things going on this trip, the more uneasy I felt. I couldn't stop myself from scanning the woods every time we sat on the deck or were outside. I felt as if I were being watched, some kind of sixth sense in me making the hairs on my arms and neck stand at attention. I never mentioned this to Nancy, but around 10 p.m. that evening she told me we should go inside and play a board game. She actually told me she was feeling a little creeped out. I immediately laughed and downplayed it, saying yes, we could go find a game to play inside. We had just got the game set up and were pouring drinks when the same thing that had happened to me the night before in the outhouse happened again to the cabin wall. A thunderous bang as something smashed into the logs from outside. Of course we both jumped and then stood there staring at each other, frozen in terror. I had actually spilled my drink all over myself, and after a few seconds I was mad again. Enough of this. Damn kids tormenting us, I was sure of it now. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the front door. Before I could even open the door, the other side of the cabin received the same treatment. Another loud crashing thud. I stopped in my tracks. Maybe it wasn't kids. Maybe it was a bear. I ran to the back door and shut it and bolted it. Nancy was standing at the front door. "Come here," she hissed. "I think someone's out there." I moved to stand beside her, both of us looking into the darkness. All of a sudden, the solar-powered sensor light on the shed where my husband keeps his tools burst on. At first we saw nothing. Then Nancy pointed and whispered, "Look, over there." Turning to where she pointed, at first I saw nothing. Then I could see standing in the shadows, just off from the shed, what looked like two figures standing hunched over. One tall and thick, the other only reaching the waist of the first and much thinner. To me the dark bodies looked disproportionate with long arms hanging to either side of the motionless figures. I pointed my flashlight and turned it on. The beam helped a little, but it was not strong enough. I could see what looked like human faces, but the bodies were covered in hair. I did not see any clothes. Suddenly the yard light went out. As soon as it did, I ran to the closet in Nancy's bedroom. My husband always kept a shotgun in there in the back against the wall. The shells were in the dresser, bottom drawer at the back. I wasn't and am still not much for guns, but my brother and father were hunters and I could use one if I had to save my life. As I came back out into the kitchen, Nancy gasped at me. "Karen, what are you doing?" I was loading that fucking gun, that's what I was doing. Something hit the screen window and bounced onto the porch, interrupted our discussion. I had the gun loaded by that time. I gave Nancy my flashlight and told her I was going on the porch. I thought about firing a warning shot in the air, but I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. I opened the door to step out onto the porch. Nancy was behind me holding the light. I stopped as I noticed something lying on the porch. Yeah, you guessed it. Another smooth river stone. I really couldn't figure out what was going on. I wanted to cry in frustration and fear. Suddenly Nancy told me to wait. She ran back to her room and came out, lugging her pack. From the outside mesh pocket she pulled out the Barbie doll we had found the day before. I had no idea what she was doing. "Do you want this?" she called. She moved me from the doorway and stood there holding the flashlight on the doll. "I think you dropped this the other day," she called into the darkness. "You can have it back." She bent over and took the rock from the porch. "I'll trade you," she said in a calm voice. Nancy walked down the steps and dropped the Barbie torso on the flagstone at the bottom. "It's okay," she called. "We're going inside now." I stood there, mouth open, thinking I was having some kind of aneurysm or something. What the hell was going on? Nancy came back to the front door and gently pulled me inside with her. I shut and bolted the door. We moved back over to the couch. Nancy had me set the gun down. I didn't unload it. Turning to me, she explained. "I've been thinking about everything going on here," she whispered. "Those are forest people," she said. "My grandfather was a Micmac Indian from Canada. He used to tell us stories of gifting to the forest people. They won't hurt you, but if they want to trade, you should trade with them." I just sat there in disbelief, still trying to process what I had seen and what Nancy was telling me. We didn't hear anything else that night. No banging, no crying, no hissing or chittering. All was quiet. Nancy and I both slept in the same room that night, if you can call it sleep. I would drift off only to have nightmares about being carried off by hairy forest people. When we got up the next morning, we went out and checked the front porch. The bottom flagstone was empty. No Barbie. It was gone. Was Nancy right? At the time, I was pretty confused about the whole situation. We ate a cold breakfast, packed up, and we were out of there. I didn't go back to the cabin for the next 2 years. Slowly, I have regained my trust in the normality in our cabin in the woods. Are they still in the woods around our cabin, those forest people? I don't know. We had never seen or heard anything before or since that encounter. I believe they are out there somewhere, but they were probably just passing through. Many years of looking at online encounters and reading as much as I could about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and native legends led me to believe that my friend Nancy and I did in fact have our own weekend in the woods with forest people. I cannot explain what else they could be. To follow up, I did contact the neighbors down at the next lake, and they did tell my husband and I that they were not at their camp that weekend. They also told us that when they checked their property and trails, nothing was out of the ordinary. To my knowledge, they themselves have never had any kind of strange encounter in the woods. So make of this encounter what you will. It happened, and I am now a firm believer that the woods do hold more than just animals. Safe travels, Gary, and thank you for sharing my encounter, Karen. Alright guys, let me know in the comments, what do you think of that one? I thought it was pretty good. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next adventure. Coleman lantern. Son of a... Oh. Oh, it's still in there. Oh God. I'm surrounded by moths. Tiny. Oh God. Oh. It's right there. I don't know where I was. Came back to the front door and gently pulled me inside with her. I shut. Oh God. Are you fucking kidding me? Oh God. It burns. Oh, my eyes are watering. You guys think I was joking? Look at my window. Right here. Those little, I don't know what they are. Some kind of mayfly. They come off the lake. They're attracted by the lamp. Oh yeah. That's what I was out there breathing in. Thousands of them out there.